Now we welcome questions. Ku perse wahaya shkara makhwa peshkesh bkin. Keke Said, I can see you from screen that you physically raising your hand. You can also do that by a button. So the mic is yours, Said Keskin, please.
از بخیراتنا مامۆستا مایکل دکم.
ناف خير دابي.
سلاو و ڕێز لە بریتانیا ji bo we. Hêvîdarim hûn dûrî ji korona bin. Mamosta te tiştê gelek baş gotin ji bona kurmancî soranî. Niha mamosta te dît 25 îlona 2017 li başûrê Kurdistan çi bû? Referandum. Referandumê ne cîhana Rojava pejirand, ne jî welatên herêmê Tirkiye, Îran, Iraq û Sûriye. Ne pejirandin başûr bibe welatekî serbixwe. Baş e, bêyî serxwebûn û desthilata netewî zimanê standard wê çawa çêbe? And if I say that you saw what happened in Bashur when they asked for independence, a referendum for independence, United States of America and European Union, nobody accepted, as well as Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Without a national independence and sovereignty, how can we standardize Kurdish language, please? That is my question. سپاس دکم مامۆستا جان.
Ez be İngilizce yan be Kurdî bersiv bidim.
Kîjanê dedî bona ez tu dixwazî ez Kurdî dixwazim lê belê çê dibe temaşevanên me hemî kurmancî tê negihêjin. Tu dixwazî hem kurmancî bêje hem îngilîzî bêje. Kurd. Em spasiye te dikin mamosta can.
Serçava. Well, I don't think that I don't see why the two matters are connected. I think it's up to the Kurds to decide how the language is standardized. And if you look at how the language is already being standardized, even if not officially, not consciously, but if you look at the language that for instance, in journals such as New Bahar, to a certain extent, every writer has his own style and writes with his own vocabulary, but also to a very large extent, also what we've seen here on Kurmanji online, I was amazed, I was blown away at how many people were writing their Kurmanji in, I mean, it already is standardized, you could practically say. I mean, I think we just need to recognize that this is already happening, but I'm just trying to tweak it. But I don't think that we need an official government. And the example, I wrote an article recently in Kurmanji about the history of the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language, which for 2,000 years had died out as a spoken language. It was only the language of prayers. But at the beginning of the 20th century, a small number of Jews who had no idea that in 1948, the state of Israel was going to be declared. There's no way they could have known that in the year 1900. But a small number of them went to Palestine and started to speak to their children in Hebrew. I mean, these were people whose native language was Yiddish, in some cases maybe Russian or Polish or German, and some of them were from Yemen, so their native language might have been Judeo-Arabic. But these people decided that they wanted to revive the Hebrew language. Luckily, Kurdish is still alive, so it hasn't gotten to the point where it's died out. But I don't think that we would succeed in reviving it. Hebrew is the only language in the history of the world that has succeeded in being revived after having been dead for 2,000 years as a spoken language. But my point is, for about 50 years, this started just before 1900. So about 50 years, people started to revive the Hebrew language. And by 1948, there were 2 or 3 generations of native speakers who by then could become teachers for more people. So I see that as an example of how government and official recognition are a separate issue from what people are doing. Every father and mother decide under their roof what language their children are going to speak. That's not something that they have to ask permission for and even if they supposedly did have to, what are they going to do? Put a soldier in their house and who's standing there every time someone gets up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom? It's really a decision largely of the parents. So I think that our work is to help encourage Kurdish parents to understand that each one of them, like the 40 Rezvan in my story, each one of them is important has a part to play in passing this language on to the next generation. That's all.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chyet. Sean?
Yes, thank you. It's Schwan. I'm a linguist with the Ohio State University and Kurd from Kirkuk. Thank you, Mamasta Michael. It's good to see you again.
Likewise.
Yes. So I wanted to ask about a specific example that you gave, but then kind of generally about how you feel about these things. So I noticed you used Gotin as an example of where a Sorani or a Central Kurdish dialect and a Northern Kurdish dialect shared such a word, and that it would be a good standard. But also the Wutin, the word Wutin is common with Haurami, with Wate, and with Zazaki and Watish, I believe. Right?
Vaten.
Yeah. Yes, right.
Yeah, I've thought about that.
All right, so, and also it becomes closer with Baluchi and with ancient Iranian languages like Avestan, where it comes from Ukhta, where this Gotin type form with a ga or a ka is more like the change that happened in Farsi, for instance. With,
Goftan.
Yeah. Exactly. So I guess what I was wondering is, are you, with proposing this idea, are you just want to look at Sorani and Kurmanji, or also other Kurdish languages or minority Iranian languages within the area, or connections kind of broader speaking? And should we even be concerned about things like this? I mean, I know a lot of people that I know would rather move away from things that sound like Farsi, for instance. So I guess generally speaking, how broad do we need to be with this umbrella? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts are that when this goes from being just my idea to being an idea embraced by many people, it's going to change. And that's a good thing. I mean, if your input just now, I mean, I've thought about how Wutin is sort of like, the argument could be made that Wutin is like Vaten, and maybe we should just let Wutin and Kutin and Gotin coexist, which is the reality anyway. I mean, you know, each individual word, you could make an argument in this way or another way, but the point is for this not to just remain in my head in my study. It's got to be exported to the Kurds, and it will change. And that's a good thing, and I'm delighted. I mean, here I am, not even leaving my house, and I'm talking to you, and well, you're in Ohio, and they're in London. Actually, well, there's a joke about that, but if we have time later, I'll share it with you.
Thank you, Mamusta.
Sure.
Thank you, Shwan and Master. Bakir Kurdo, you can raise your question now, please. Bakir.
الو ايوار باش
Evar baş?
سپاس ماموستا ببور ازي بكرمانجي برسا خبكم
Keremke.
من شكل آواز بيا تشتيكو من فهم كر ج بيشنياري وتقول كو حكومات هريم كردستاني دفي بحردو ذارافايان يعني كرمانجي سوراني پروردي بدي اذباوردكم تأفبو تشتيكو من فهم كر بالكيجي من
لا
شاش فهم كر
من بريفاجي من قوتكو
ها
لباشور بتني بسوراني دكن وبدي تنمن اف شاشيه كمزنه.
بالي وثيا ويكافي ما وثا يعني مثال هيرو نيرين تجي الروجافا جي دفي يعني سورانيجي بكافي پروردي تبليكو امزانن الروجافا كردستاني يعني كسنا تنن ايكو كرمانجي تتني كرمانجي خلق دي بيفي بسوراني نا بيفي ديتناتا ابجي تشتكي اريني اكو يعني درسين سورانيجي بدن يا نا
As the current basement ko heftia bait as a derse ke sorani bedema sazia kurm zmani kurdi le kamishloki yani wan jimin khwest ko as wan hini sorani bekem yani khwestin jwan hat najmen beja يعني ادبيجم كو او هين بونا سوراني وك پارچه که ناسنامه اخوه یا نتوایی دبینن مرسی و من وسایه
سپاس مامستا
سرچاوا
Spas Master. And Nikki Crane. Nikki, are you here?
Yes, I'm Nikki. I'm in Albania, as I think you know, Michael.
Absolutely.
I'd be interested in your ideas about Zazaki, where you've got these maybe three main dialects, largely incomprehensible to each other as far as I can tell, and a very sort of politicized idea of which is the right dialect, so that a lot of them don't approve of standard Zazaki because they say it's not.
Well, I don't think there is very much broadcasting in Zazaki. And once you start broadcasting in a language, bive neve, whether you want to or not, it standardizes in the sense that people are exposed to a form of the language that they don't hear around them. And also broadcasting in a language gives a language sort of a stamp of officiality, of credibility that it didn't have before. So prestige, you might even say. So I think that the more that there is broadcasting in Zaza, I know there, like for instance, Kurd-Akad had a little bit. It had, for instance, Malmi Sanij and Mahmoud Lawendi would have a sohbet every once in a while. One spoke Kurmanji, the other answered in Zaza. But the more that there is, the more people will be exposed. I mean, one point that I wanted to make, and I'm glad that you've sort of reminded me of it, because there is not an educational system in Kurdish right now.
Yeah.
Broadcasting plays a double role. It's very important that broadcasting use a good form of the language, because it is automatically a school for everybody listening to it. If they use a crappy form of the language, then everybody's going to use that crappy form and think it's okay. Whereas if they use, if they, for instance, use their ergatives correctly, if they say min tuditi instead of min tadit, then people are going to imitate them and speak, you know, a better Kurdish if they're hearing a better Kurdish. And by the same token, I think that would be true of Zaza too. But I did want to make the point that anybody who is broadcasting or writing, journalists, have to understand that, particularly because of the lack of education, official education in this language, everybody who is using this language with an eye to reaching a large audience has the responsibility to use language that is going to be understood by everybody. And if they're introducing new words, they need to explain what those new words are. Don't just throw it on. You don't start saying bivelers and expect everybody to know you're talking about ard hajin or an earthquake. You have to explain it. So I mean, I don't know to what extent I've answered your question, but you've given me food for thought and an opportunity to mention something else that I had wanted to mention anyway. So thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a form of Zazaki that all Zaza understand. I suspect there isn't.
Well, I know several people ask. One of them is Khejay, who's here today. My friend Bahri Demir, who has a wonderful website for Zaza, and of course Malmi Sanij. I mean, but they're all from, well, two of them are from Siverek Chermuk, and Malmi Sanij, the village of Malmi San is near Lice, I think. I don't, but we would have to have input from people from Dersim too. That's a very important region.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, just an input here.
Yes. Yes.
Just an input and further answer to Nikki's question here. The best group that is still trying to standardize Zazaki is Bate, as you know, Michael. And in that Bate group, you have Zazaki speaking representative from all areas of where Zazaki is spoken, including people from Dersim, and they have vast publications now. Okay, it's still a work in progress, as it has started only 25 years ago, as opposed to Kurmanji, which has started over a century ago, the standardizing work, I guess, with Badr Khan's family. It is a work in progress. Will it make it in time to save this language? That's a question, but the best source group to refer for a standard Zazaki is them. I think we can say this.
Absolutely.
As a Zazaki speaker myself, and who has done a bit of work on Zaza. Thank you. We still have quite a few, many questions. I hope we can give a chance to all of them. It's not just a Zoom platform today. We have Facebook Live stream as well. We are fed questions from there. So I'd like to quickly give the voice to Kevin, who has raised his hand in Zoom room. Kevin?
Hello.
Kevin?
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question for Dr. Michael Chyet. Last Saturday on the National Museum of Language live event, you mentioned that the Zaza language has no transitional dialects with Northern Kurdish. Since Zaza belongs to the Zaza Gorani group, Is it right to say Gorani also has no transitional dialects with Kurdish?
Yes, but there are certain vocabulary items in, let's say, the area around Sinai, so the southern part of the Central Kurdish group. I'm avoiding using the word Sorani out of respect for people. But there is some vocabulary that is used in Sinai that you'll also find in Gorani. But those are regional words. Like, for instance, the way to say, do you want something? They use, actually, it's the Turkish word. They say çit gereka instead of çit deveya. And in Haurami too, they say çeşit gereka. So they both, that's a regional thing. I don't know that that's, I mean, you have to, but I don't see that as the same thing as transitioning into the local Kurdish dialect.
Thank you for that. My next thing is, since Kurdish has no transitional dialects with these neighboring northwestern Iranian languages being Zazaki and Gorani, despite having the strongest contact with Kurdish out of all northwestern Iranian languages, but southern Kurdish has transitional dialects with Luri Bakhtiari, which is a southwestern Iranian language.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't this indicate that Kurdish is a southwestern Iranian language? Am I correct in saying this is a genealogical relationship, being a transitional dialect, that Kurdish has with no other language besides a southwestern Iranian language?
All I can tell you is that in the last couple of years, the whole classification of now northwestern, southwestern in the Iranian languages has been thrown into question, and I have kept out of it. That would have been a good question to ask Deanne McKenzie, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. But there are such people as Eric, I can't think of his last name. There's a fellow who's been working on the Southern dialects, and Sarah Bellelli, who's an Italian woman who's been working on the Southern Kurdish dialects. I would ask them. I have my hands full as it is with the stuff further north. I mean, I'm interested in that, but I'm just not knowledgeable enough about it to, and I would rather say I don't know rather than pretending like I do.
Okay, thank you for that. And my final question would be
Annenby, Eric Annenby. Thank you, Jaffer. The name of the person is Eric Annenby. Jaffer to the rescue. Thank you. Yeah. Did you have another question, Kevin?
Yeah, my last question is, it's linguistic, but it's also got historical context, which is some scholars propose the name of the region Kurdian or Gordian was the ancient lexical equivalent of Kurdistan, and the people of the region were Proto-Kurds, the region subsequently being Proto-Kurdish. Since Kurdian was under Armenian and Roman control for extensive periods in history, then surely we should also be able to find clear influences from Latin and Old Armenian if this region was Proto-Kurdish. And so are there any strong traces of the Latin in the Kurdish language? Is there evidence in the Kurdish language of direct contact with Old Armenian?
Well, I haven't studied Old Armenian, but I know some modern Armenian, and there certainly are Kurdish words. I mean, Armenian words in Kurdish. For instance, the word to deceive in Kurdish, chapandin. Well, chapin is to be deceived, chapan is to deceive. And in Armenian, the word chapel exists. And I mean, there are several words that I perceive Kurdish as having borrowed from Armenian. I would say, particularly in the area around Dersim, that area, there are, for instance, two words that are clearly from Armenian that are used in that region. The word for a broom, they say havlik or avlik, which is from Armenian avel, and heli or hili, which is a mirror from Armenian hayeli. But when you get into old Armenian, what I do know is that half of the vocabulary, roughly half of the vocabulary of Armenian is borrowed from Middle Persian. So there you're going to have words that appear to be cognate, which actually are cognate, but it's not necessarily because of a Kurdish. It would be because that Iranian word and the Kurdish word are cognate. Words like, for instance, to laugh, in modern Persian, khandidan, in Kurdish it's kanin or peykanin. In modern Armenian it's khintal or khindal, depending on whether it's Eastern or Western. And that khintal is Persian khandidan. I mean, there are many words where sometimes Armenian preserves the Middle Persian form of a word, which has gone on to change in modern Persian, like pasoch in Persian, which means an answer. It was originally from something like pati sacha, and in modern Armenian, the way to say to answer is padas chanel. So it's the pati of the Middle Persian is preserved in modern Armenian. But what you ask is a very interesting question, and it's the first time that I've heard of it. But one would have to, I don't know the answer, but one thing one would need to distinguish between natural Indo-European cognates on the one hand, and words which would actually be borrowings from Latin or Old Armenian on the other hand.
Thank you both. Burwa Ismail.
I'm listening. Go ahead, Minlateya.
Burwa Ismail, sorry, for a second my mic went off. Burwa Ismail, if you're here, the mic is yours now for your question, please.
I don't hear anything.
Hello,
Burwa Ismail.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Sorry about that. My name is Burwa Ismail. I'm from Bashur, but I live in Washington, D.C. now. You mentioned that the Sorani and the Kurmanji issue in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I know that let's say the Bahdini is at a disadvantage in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, but what do you think is the solution? How can we come up with a standard, let's say a standard language in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and bearing in mind that there's always this that they say divide and conquer. Then how do we make a standard language, and how can we come up with a standard language only for the Kurdistan region of Iraq? Thank you.
Well, my opinion is that everything should be in both Kurmanji and in Sorani. I mean, if you went in 1987, as I did, to Kosovo, to towns like Prizren and Pristina in Kosovo, signs everywhere were in 3 languages: Serbian, Turkish, and Albanian. And I mean, there was a language being excluded, that being Romani, the language of the Gypsies, the Roma. But if you, at the same time, if you went to Mardin in Kurdistan of Turkey, everything would only be in Turkish, though people would be speaking in Turkish and Kurdish and Arabic and probably in Turoyo also. So, I mean, on the one hand, you see an area where they're recognizing the linguistic plurality, variety, and another place where they're not. So the reality in Iraqi Kurdistan is that you have both Kurmanji and Sorani, not to mention Suryani, and there are some places where Turkmen is also spoken, and Arabic. But as far as Kurdish is concerned, everything, in my opinion, should be in Kurmanji and Sorani. I think that the issue of choosing one and imposing one on everyone else is a recipe for problems later on. I think we need to learn from the terrible mistakes that were made after World War I. A lot of the decisions that were made then we're still suffering from now. And we're fully 100 years since the Treaty of Lausanne, for instance. So I think that it's very important to not underestimate how important decisions that are made today will be in the future.
If I may have a follow-up question with that, sorry. Do you think just the signs are enough if we have like the signs in both like Sorani and Kurmanji? I mean, like just a realistic question. Let's say that we have a parliament session. I mean, how can we make sure that, you know, both languages are used in a parliament session, or when the prime minister or the president is addressing the nation, something like that? What about the education? Like, how can we make sure that, you know, Soranis learn Kurmanji, or let's say Bahdini, or the Bahdinis learn Sorani as well?
Well, what I said earlier is what I envision is an educational system in which everybody is being educated in both Kurmanji and Sorani. And also the more that one has exposure to the other dialect, the easier it is to understand it. If you ask your average Kurd in Bakur if he or she understands Sorani without having had any exposure to it, of course the answer is going to be no. But in what we're calling Bashur, where Kurmanji and Sorani speakers are in constant contact, there already is a lot of familiarity with the other dialect, and there also are a lot of vocabulary words that are used from the one in the other. I mean, today in Sorani, words with a V, such as Haval and Bizav, they're commonly used in Sorani, and they were borrowed straight from Kurmanji in the late 90s, in the early 90s, about after the Gulf World War, the first Gulf War. But I think that an educational system has got to take, rather than educating everybody in English, which is not dealing with the issue, and it's also not showing that people are proud of being Kurdish. I think that if there's any place that has the opportunity to actually have education in both Kurmanji and Sorani in schools, it's Iraqi Kurdistan. And I don't see it happening right now. I would like to see it happen, but it has not been happening. And the excuse that on their official seals and documents, there isn't room to have things in both alphabets, to quote Mrs. Slocum, that's weak as water. I don't buy that. So I mean, the limitations are the limitations of the human imagination. I think that issues that a way could be, a system could be created, an artistic work could be created that has both, let's say, Sorani in the Arabic script and Kurmanji in the Latin script, or both in the Arabic script, whatever. But I mean, I just don't find that a convincing excuse.
Okay, Mamasa, thank you. I'd like to give place to some questions from other platforms other than Zoom.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, so can we make it one or two questions? Because it's already 3:30.
Yeah. Yes, I know you did say you have other commitments to keep up. This question comes from Kurdo.Meher. He says, has a Proto-Kurdish language been reconstructed? Which language or language group is closest to the Kurdish language or varieties? What are some unacute features found in the Kurdish language, but not in other Indo-European languages?
Okay, I'm writing the name of I think I got it right, of an article, an early article by D.N. Mackenzie, Pseudo-Proto-Kurdica, in which he has a little, I think it's a poem, a brief little text in what looks like a very early Kurdish, a form of Kurdish. The problem is, I mean, people say that the Kurds are the descendants of the Medes. I mean, certainly if you look at a map, it's possible. The problem is as of today, there are no documents. There aren't manuscripts or inscriptions in the Median language. So without any actual evidence, what can we say? I mean, we know because Herodotus, the Greek historian, tells us that the word for dog in Median was spaka, and I'll write that too. We know that word, and if that is true, the Kurmanji word sa and the Sorani word sag and the Persian word sag, for that matter, could come from that. I mean, if you think of it as spaka, then became swaga, then became saga, then sag, something like that, it is possible. But the big problem is that we don't have any written manuscripts or documentation of that go back that far. It's possible that there are some, you know, underground somewhere, or, you know, that something like that will come to light at some point. But as of now, we simply don't have such a thing. And if somebody wants to work on creating a time machine so that we could go back, that might also be a way. But realistically, it's a problem. The only two ancient Iranian languages that we know anything about are Old Persian and Avestan, and that's because we have inscriptions largely for Old Persian and manuscripts such as the Gathas and things in the Avesta for those languages. But we assume that there were several other contemporary Iranian languages. We simply don't have any documentation of them.
Okay, thank you, Namaste. Haval Haji has raised hand since almost from beginning, so I'd like to give the mic to him. Or yeah, Haval.
من پرسیار تدید.
Haval Haji, are you here? No.
دمباش ولی از الورم دمباش از بیوی مکون همو باش بن براستی دبگو پرسام جدر و مجاربه من پرسکرش بری من ویسان تا گوت تکاری پرسکی پرسام جی اف بول جم گلک زمانزان کرد دبیجن کو جنافتن کسانه ین طواندی بس دم بوری را بله کرن گلگو هزرتن لگاوا مول هفوکا من دوی از هر مالی یعنی بواتا از دخوازم هر مالی دنارم دوی من دوی دمان هاده اری گلگو هزر لی دمان هاده گر من دوی دمان هاده بیجبو چه زمانزانی ناس زمانزانی کرد حمود بیجن کو کما من بس به دما بوری رته از ویچ تیپ ناگن مراستی یعنی بلکی یکی آن دو زمانزان کرد هنه یک جی عبدالله جانه یدیجی ابراهیم زاخویه او بیجن کو من دمان نهاده جی تی بکارانی لیوکی دن همو یعنی بگشتی زمانزان کرد حمود بیجن کما من بس به دما بوری رته تو کومنت تا لسر ویچ ته هنو تو کاری ویچ ته شو ورپی اگر ما مستم مایکل چاد به یعنی کسک دن به وز گالاکس فاز دار بوم گالاکس فاز فرصه دیجم هبوم جبو وانا
از دخوازم بر صفه ویب
یک پرسه بگرن ام تاني یک پرسه بگرن برکو یه
پرسام نادیج بو وانا ببوره پرسام نادیج بو وانا سورانی بو امتکارم داشت دار ببین
یا سزکه یا هفته بیت
بله
سر سران و سر شوان جه خجه پتک بپرسه لی هرچی من دوید اف وقت دمویه بسورانی یعنی لور اف یعنی من دوید وقت از دخوازم یعنی من لور دیسان تواندیه افنا روشا خورویه من دوید بسورانی دویشن دمویه عيني وسايا يعني أو ليكرك تايبتية دفيت بسري خوي يعني يجب أن أو جرك از نظام تو كيجان زماني دزاني كوز
از بعربي جي تزانو بس بإنجليزي جي بيدقم قرصامي جي أفبو من دفي بواتا خوستك نبواتا يجب عربي يعني نا موس از بواتا خوستك لسرد آخفم يعني من طواندية وددمان هذا اللي زمانزاني كرد حمود بيجين كوما من بس ددما بوريده بلي كان قلقو هزرتي
بلي راستا از دبيج متى دفيت بسري خوي يعني يجب أن من دفيت يعني مروف دكارة نكارة بيف وير بقرينه يعني أو ليكرك تايبتية يعني ليكرين دين تونن وك فيتن يعني فيان لي بسوراني عيني وسايا دموي ما يا دموي ديسان أو جهناف كا وك تواندية يعني نافي من ناوم من دفيت دموي يعني يعني بقشتي يعني وك قايدة as to أو أم هون أو روشة خوروية من تا وي ما وان أو روشة تواندية لي دقل لي كرا فيان لبهدينان نمازل لبهدينان چند فرین دنجی مروف دبیجه لشونا از دخوازم مروف دکاره بیجه من دوید تا دوید وی دوید و وک میناک حماتك بتحبك خاصية جتا پر حزدك لبهدينان دبيجن خاصية تو دويي لور دويي يعني جتا حزدك تحبك يعني بيفا ليكرا فيان وك استثناء دما نهودا جي وك ليكرين جرگو هز دما بوريدا تي كشاندن ليبتني او ليكر بخويا ليكرين دن وسا نابن يعني از وساد دين
باشا كلك سواس
سير شباب متحت استناب هيزم
Osman, if you're here, there's one last hand I can see on screen here. Been there for a while. Osman, please ask your question. Osman, Tukari, not here?
Osman?
Okay, if not, can I have one more question from Facebook?
Avahat, denge manati.
Bele.
Qsure mezneke. Zor spas mamosta, per spas. Sawalam jbo hajmara bu. وقتا که از لکمستری خبتیم جرای کمین وقتا از هین جوان بوم مدید بلاتینی دگوت 1 2 3 and then ملينا ريج جيكي حياب دها جوان جمارنا دورا حفت حيش حبا پر نزي كردي دهات قالوا تلسر via خبتي يدتك يا كرمانجي او لاتيني هي توني قالك سباس
بله هي من جي اخفتنك جي دايا لسر اتيمولوجي يعني كوكنا سيا هجماران از دكارم ويج ترى بشينم اگر تو دخوازي سدي سج بركو كرمانجي زمانكي هندو اوروبائيه قالك هجمارن ج يك هتا ده قالك تيكلي هنا تناف برا كردي وفارسي جعليه كيفا وزمانين هندو اوروبائيين دندا چه انجليزي والماني با چه لاتيني با چه يوناني با چه روسي با قالك هما بيجي با هر يكي جوان تيكلي هنا بيوندي هنا بله
زور سپاس
سر چوا
Master, how long should we say? If you, I mean, it's up to you. I know you have.
I'm already over time.
Okay, well, we have to end here. Thank you so very much, Master, for sparing your time today. It's never enough in time to benefit from your vast knowledge on Kurdish studies and mainly Kurdish language. We as Kurd-Akad UK plan to do sort of bigger events, greater than just seminars in terms of language and what we can do. We will surely bother you, contact you for further ideas, talks, and for our future plans.
I look forward to it.
And I can see Master Jafar Sheikhul Islam is here also. We'll soon bother him too for similar works. Thank
Wonderful.
you so very much, Master Michael Chyet. Spas kim bo te u bo bashtar vanin kur iro levrin rasti kelek barname ki tijabu wak mgo وقت مجبورن جي كده بقدنن جاري كدن برنامج كدن ام خوازن دسا بورابن سپاسكم هستم.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to future communications. La haya meja have do her heba.
سر سرا سر چاوا سپاس.
Okay. Khatire we.